Hello, it's Deborah from the Attic, and in today's video I want to share a number of ways that I've distressed and altered some playing cards. I have a whole bundle here that have a Scottish theme. I got some Scotland playing cards which I think are quite good fun, and I'll show you how I changed them, how I managed to get ink to stick to what is quite a shiny card. I'll show you also how I managed to make them into portraits using the cork cards, and I'll also show you these where I used some tissue paper that we created in an earlier video and turned this into a little pocket. I have a whole load of playing cards here which have been distressed and altered. They started out like this. You can see that Scottish theme there. And what I've done, and I'll take you through my process, but I've taken gesso, white gesso, you get this in art stores, and I've put a layer of white gesso on the base of each of these cards, and this gives tooth to anything you want to add on top of that. If you want to ink it or paint it or add ink around the edges, gesso will help it adhere, because a playing card is quite a shiny thing. It's got a coated surface which you can't really print on. Let's give it a go and I'll show you the difference. If I ink up my stamp, I'm just using my normal word stamp. I use this for many things. It doesn't really adhere, and if I take my cloth it will wipe away. So that's not, anything you put on there isn't really going to adhere very well unless you used a StazOn ink. StazOn inks are designed to grab straight onto non-porous substrates, but I don't have this in the brown that I want to use, so that's why I'm going to use the gesso. The other thing I like about the gesso is you can see that it tones down the back of your card, so the image is still visible, but it's a much softer, much more subtle effect. Once they've had their layer of gesso applied, I then added a strip of tissue paper. This was the tissue paper that we printed out earlier, and that's just ripped and glued across, and then I have a piece of scrap paper, and again I've ripped a piece from that, I've inked up the edges and put that across, and then I've taken some words. So I print out any words that I want to use on a project. I print them out using whichever font I want to use, and then I just very roughly ink over the word, and then I'll cut it out and I'll add a little frame, a little border, using a fine brown marker pen. Then I sewed around the outside edge, and you can see it's a plain stitch, and then somewhere there is a decent zigzag. There we go, there's a decent zigzag. And then this little bit of texture, I don't know if you can see that, there's some little dots of texture there. They make it look like there's something old has got into the card. It's actually embossing powder, and it's using the technique in an earlier video where we looked at doing embossing powder mixes and faux seals, and if you sprinkle that on and heat from below, you'll grab that on the card. It won't, if you heat it from the top it will blow away, so you need to heat from below. None of this takes very long, so I'm going to start with the gesso, and you can put it in a little pool on a craft mat if you want. I'm just going straight onto my card. I'm just doing one layer and covering it up very lightly. That will dry nice and quickly. That's dry, and you can see it's now nicely veiled. I'm going to ink up my stamp, and I'm just going to drop my card onto the image. There we go. And that will grab onto the card now. I don't have to worry that that won't stick in place. I've got my foam applicator, and I'm going to go around the outside edge of my playing card with some ink. Then I'm going to grab my tissue paper. I like a nice rough edge. You could cut this if you wanted it to be a clean, sharp edge. And I like it to go a little bit at an angle. So I've got some tape runner, and I'm going to add 2 lines of tape to the bottom half of my card. That's just enough to grab the tissue paper about there. And then I've still got a little bit of a glue line below my tissue paper so that I can add a strip of book paper. I don't want the book paper to dominate the bottom of the card too much. That's quite nice. I'm going to ink the top and the bottom edges of my little strip of wordy paper. And where I still have a little bit of tape, tape glue, I'm going to add it on top. And because I don't want my edges to be too perfect, I'm going to rip the edges rather than cut the edges, and I can use the card as a guide. Now I have my words, and I'm going to choose the word legend. These are for a Scottish journal I'm working on, both for myself and, if I have enough, maybe for sale as well. I think I will have enough. So this is where the Scottish theme comes in, and for my words I've chosen words that I associate with Scotland. I've avoided things like Nessie because and hoots and kilts and sporrans, because the book I make, the journal I make, I want it to be true Scotland, the Scotland that I grew up in, and I also want it to be about modern Scotland, because Scotland isn't just trapped in the past. And having said that, the word that I've chosen is legends, but I've written down loads of words I associate with Scotland, like Highlands, Islands, Castles, Clan, Celtic, Miss Caledonian. I've got some other words like Cayley, Thistle, things like that. So these are words that I associate with my Scotland. I have a brown pen. This is a Pitt Artist pen. It's dark sepia. And before I stick my little word in place, I'm going to give it a frame. This will help it stand out because we already have quite a lot of words on our scrap of paper. And I'm going to get my little dotty glue. I'm going to decide where to put it first. So it could go here, it could go down here. I think here is nice. A little bit of glue, and that adheres to the card like that. Interestingly, the reverse of this card is upside down. I did notice this with some others. So this is the face card the right way up, and this is the card the other way up. So I've got some gesso on the outside. It doesn't matter, because when I stitch around that, that will be sort of consumed within the stitching. So I'm going to do that just now off camera. I've added a row of straight stitching around the outside and some zigzag stitching across the centre. Now you could leave the threads dangling. My Neat Freak can cope with deliberate, I must say, deliberate wonky stitching around here, but it can't cope with too many dangly whatnots. So they're going. Like I say, if you like those, leave them, because they do add extra character. But I can't do it. I just can't do it. And then on the other side, It hasn't interfered with the image at all, that's still there, even if it is upside down. See, I'm not making this up. So this is the upside down one. So if I turn them both the same way, Piper upside down, Piper right way up. So if you were playing cards, you could maybe cheat, because you would know which were the marked cards. To complete this, I'm going to use, this is a very old embossing powder that I hardly use anymore, and it's a shame, and it should be used. And in an earlier video I looked at how you can use up old embossing powders that maybe just aren't relevant, that maybe the colour mix doesn't work for you anymore, whatever the reason may be. You can use them up in other ways. I'm going to add more than I would normally add, just so you can see. I like to add just a tiny little flutter of embossing powder. I'm going to heat this from below. I'm going to do it at a funny angle because I don't want the heat to get on the camera lens, because it might prevent you seeing what's happening. But to start with, you want to get your craft gun very, very warm, very, very hot. So let it sit for a couple of minutes to get really warm. Heat from below, not too close. I started maybe 3-4 inches away, and then when you think it's all adhered okay, you can heat from the top. It's very, very subtle. Very, very subtle. And I've got, I'm not going to touch it because it might still be a wee bit hot, I've got copper there, that lovely little shimmer of copper on the side and just across where it was sprinkled really loosely. It's so subtle you can barely see it, but it's a nice little detail that I like to add to the cards. So that is how to make a whole load of distress cards. There's a king around here where it's really obvious. I thought he needed to have lots of copper, but you can see it there far more clearly. So those cards are ready to use in my journal. For this card, I've used the Queen from one of the other playing cards and set it on top of an Ace of Hearts as a sort of a portrait. The way that I've done that is I've cut out 2 frames using a die cut that I happen to have, and I've cut 2 so that I can place one on top of the other to give this frame a little bit of extra dimension. And using a soft rag, I've taken some Pebeo gilding wax. This is Renaissance, so there are different shades of gold, and this is a nice dark browny rich gold, and I've taken that to add some colour onto my frame. The next thing I need to do is use another playing card so I can cut down the king. So I'm just going to use one of the little frames and position it roughly where I want to cut, and I can trim this down because I won't get it right first time, but I'm just going to cut out the portrait so that it can be glued onto the frame itself. I want to cut through the holes, so where there are those little holes top and bottom, I want to make sure that I leave those free, because in this one at the top and the bottom I've added a couple of little paper fasteners, so I'll be using those again on my king portrait. Once I've cut him down, and I think I'm happy with that, I'm going to glue him in place. And I'm using my Beacon 3-in-1 because it is a nice wet glue which doesn't dry too quickly. It allows me wiggle room if I get things wrong, but once it's been left, it will glue beautifully, and it just it's a great glue. I really like it. It gives me maximum flexibility and maximum hold. So there's my king. And now I'm going to glue both of the frames together. I'm going to avoid those little holes. I don't want to put glue through those little holes. So I'll line them up and squash them together, and then I've got, it's not much deeper, but it's a little bit more than I would have had otherwise. And I'll put my paper fasteners in place. Oops. So that's my portrait ready, and he's going to sit on my ace card. To do the background on the card, the same as I've done with the Queen, I'm going to take some gesso, ordinary white gesso. This will help my inking stay on the card. If I just inked onto this card with my Versamark stamp, ink pad rather, it wouldn't adhere, it would smudge, it would come loose, it would be rubbish, and it wouldn't hold. I'm going to use my heat gun just to dry this a little bit quicker. Not that it takes very long. There we go. Ideal. And now I'm going to use my Versacolour ink pad. I always want to call it a stamp pad. It's an ink pad. Oh, it's a stamp pad. I've inked up my stamp. I'm just going to press my card into it, and then I'm going to sprinkle it with some nice gold embossing powder, staying with the gold theme. I'm going to heat my embossing powder and make it go lovely gold. It's turning now. There we go. Even as ornamentation on a playing card, I think that alone is really pretty, really lovely. Especially if I turn it under the lights and you can see the glitter of the gold. Now all I need to do is glue my portrait directly onto the playing card. I'm going to hold that in place while it glues, and I'm going to get my Vintage Photo ink, because I'm going to go around the outside of the card with a little of this to give it a border. And that card is finished. There's my two playing cards, altered so that the King and the Queen have their own little portraits. I've taken one of my printed tissue papers and I've turned it this way up because I'm going to attach some playing cards, and I want this side to be clear and I want this side to take the tissue paper on the front of it, and I'm going to scrunch the paper up. But to begin with, I'm going to stick down about 6 playing cards on top of this, and this is face down, so the negative is towards you. I'm using Mod Podge. This is a matte water-based sealer glue and finish, and it's very versatile. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put it on the reverse of my playing card, or the one that has the numbers facing, and I'm going to put it on here, and for the moment I'm just going to keep it all very neat and tidy, but in a moment you'll see I'm going to scrunch it all up. Before that dries completely, I'm going to just scrunch it a bit and distress it a little bit, and I don't mind if I rip it, that will just add to the texture. Job done, and I'll continue with another, I think I'll get another line in below there. I managed to sneak another one on the bottom there. So I'm going to turn it right way up, and I'm going to leave that to dry. These are now dry, so I'm not going to cut between them because I like the roughness of a rip, and I'm just going to rip them away from the sheet and remove any excess as well. Now that this is dry and I've ripped around the outside edges, I've put a piece of craft paper across the bottom, and I've added a strip of book paper which has been inked top and bottom, and then I've sewn a pocket shape so that this can be used for tags. This isn't the eventual tag that I'll put in here because it won't be a plain white tag, I'm going to work on those, but it gives you a little extra pocket, somewhere else to pop things. And if you don't want to have it loose, you could just glue it into your journal, because you'll still know it's a playing card. I'm going to finish doing the rest of these. So there we go, I've created several new tuck spots that I can use in my journal, and I think they're quite fun. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed that and maybe found some inspiration for your own journaling. I'm going to be back with another project soon, but in the meantime, take care.